I've had this obsession with synthesizers for a long time now. I believe that it is due to how I perceive my compositions or songs. I view my songs like a jigsaw puzzle that I create. Not only do I put the puzzle together, I also design and create the puzzle pieces, which are the sounds I create on synthesizers. I view my synthesizers as tools to make and complete each puzzle that I created.
My fascination with synthesizers, drone music, electronics stems from the fact that it's a realm of endless possibilities, diving into a void of chaos that is both uncontrollable and controllable. A realm where kind of anything can happen, any sort of sound, any sort of creative impulse that can be both musical and non-musical at the same time. Tonal, atonal, arrhythmic, aleatory kind of environment.
I'm Mike Noss. I'm Vertigo Blue, the artist, and I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. I moved to Houston, Texas in '94, and that's about it.
Hi, I'm Spike the Percussionist. My main synthesis project, Astrogenic Hallucinating, tends to create black ambient drone and noise for your descent into the darkness. Anyways, my interest in synthesis started back in the 80s with a lot of the bands I was listening to, and also by the direction of my professor at the time, Dr. Norman Weinberg, who's professor of percussion, and he took electronics early on as a teaching criteria to teach his students the world of MIDI and synthesis and such things as tools for composition and, for music creation.
My name is August. I'm from Houston, Texas. I've been making electronic music since I was 15 years old. Some of my early influences were Aphex Twin, Chemical Brothers, Drexcia. I started getting into modular synthesis as a way of diving deeper into the signal path so I could get the sounds I wanted.
When I was a kid, I grew up listening to a lot of rock music that was presented on the radio. Of course, my parents listened to a lot of that kind of thing. And initially, I wanted to be a guitarist and play rock music, but Mom and Dad had plans along the line where my grandfather was taking organ lessons, and they're like, "You're going to play organ." So I took organ lessons and studied a lot of classical type structure in that. And then this would have been the late 70s going into the 80s. And then I seen Duran Duran and on MTV and heard Nick Rhodes and heard their first album actually. And I remember that first album, especially, I had it on cassette, and I heard the B-side, the second side, and the minute I heard those songs, I was like, I need a synthesizer. So that's how that happened.
How did I get into synth music? A lot of it was from the types of bands that myself and my friends were listening to at the time, and the introduction of synthesizers and electronic sounds into some of the bands we're listening to. Mostly like Coil, Throbbing Gristle, Liebach, White House, and Skinny Puppy, all sorts of acts like that started using synthesis heavily in all the music that they created.
So it was 1998. I was 17 years old. A friend of mine played me a bootleg copy of Aphex Twin's Come to Daddy. And that was the point that I knew I wanted to make electronic music.
In regards to the history of synthesizers, Bob Moog, even before that, I know CBS, and there was like film and in the film industry, CBS, and they had in some of the colleges, universities back in the 50s, I think around 56 or so, they were using these big, analog synthesizers that would just take up a whole room. And over a period of time, you have inventors, pioneers like Bob Moog, for example, who came out with the Mini Moog, and then he had Moog Modular synthesizers even before that, and he had figured a way of making it more or less a smaller version where he had he figured out these main modules and he put them into a box, and which would end up being the Mini Moog, and he put a keyboard with it, and there's that process. And then once that happened, you had other inventors coming out. You had Mr. Perlman with ARP, ARP synthesizers would come out, and he had different, as time progressed, you'd had different companies, everybody from Yamaha, Roland, and Korg, and all the companies that were coming out after that. And initially, analog synthesizers were the thing, and then in the 80s, kind of fast forwarding it, Yamaha came out with the Yamaha DX7, which was frequency modulation, and FM synthesis with digital synthesizers. And then, of course, the companies were getting on that, and then they started, then later on, Roland came out in 87 with a Roland D50 synthesizer to pretty much compete against Yamaha's 1983 DX7, because the DX7 was pretty much, at that time period, was almost wiping out people using analog synthesizers because of the sound. And so in the 80s, you had so many bands that were using the DX7, and it really put a staple on the type of sound that came out from that time period. And then as time progressed into the 90s, you had we had the digital, and then it went to physical modeling synthesizers, and just different types of synthesizers would come out after that, and eventually into software and hardware that we have today.
History of synthesizers. In the 20s and 30s, there were a lot of experiments using vacuum tubes and things like that to generate sound. And then it was in the 60s where Bob Moog came along and kind of created a synthesizer platform that was commercialized, you could say. And of course, starting with modular synth designs, and then of course leading to a keyboard synthesizer as we know it today. A lot of other companies came into the synthesis game at that time as well.
So the earliest synthesizers started to happen in the 20s. You have these weird obscure instruments like the theremin, or I'm kind of at a loss for what the other ones are called. Trautonium, I think, is one of them. But they were these weird esoteric kind of things. The theremin you didn't actually touch to play. You just sort of held your hands up to these two antennas, and one controlled volume and the other controlled pitch. So you could sort of slide between notes, and you would get dynamics from the volume. It was this box with this weird curved antenna. So in America, there was Moog, Robert Moog. There was ARP with their 2600. There was Sequential, run by Dave Smith, put out the Prophet 5. There was Oberheim. And then on the West Coast, there was Don Buckla with his Music Easel, which was sort of a different style architecture than the Moogs.
Hush, now listen, can you hear the sound of my heart beating when you are around? The rhythmic beats fill the night. You give me purpose, my life is so right. You are the only one for me. You keep me living in ecstasy. You are always here with me.
Key synthesizers, I would say, 3 to 5. Mini Moog for sure, Mini Moog synthesizer. Then I would say, from my perspective, Prophet 5, the sequential circuits Prophet 5. The Yamaha DX7, of course. Roland Jupiter 8. I might be a little bit more on this. Korg M1 was a big one, workstation. Microkorg even, based off the Korg MS-2000. There's more than 4 or 5. Pretty big history of that, but yeah, those are the first ones on my list.
synthesizers. In some ways, it depends on the person, but in many ways, in the bigger scheme of things, there are the iconic sounds of course, the Moog synthesizers. The Model D is one that people always refer back to. And then it kind of gets into eras of music where iconic synthesizers like the DX7 in the 80s, and the advent of acid house with the 303, and of course the drum machines of those times like the 808s, the 909s, which in of themselves created entire genres of music. The Wasp synthesizer, again, a whole genre of music with a band like White House creating noise, power electronics, power noise, things like that. And so those are kind of some of the icon synthesizers I would kind of lean on, as well as the EMS Synthy, which almost everybody has heard if you've heard Pink Floyd. That's a really big iconic synthesizer that relied on a pin matrix patch bay instead of patch cables, and the VCS3 is also another one, and I could keep going, but yeah, that's a few.
Yeah, so I guess I mentioned the Mini Moog, the ARP 2600 was a big one. The Oberheim SEM, the Sequential Prophet 5 was a big one. It was one of the first polyphonic instruments that you could take in a keyboard. And later on, the DX7 was a big game changer.
So I had this really weird situation. When I grew up in a town called Lockport, Illinois, which is about 30 miles southwest of Chicago. And when I was a kid, we went to a church, and I sang in the choir. And it was one of the members of our choir, a guy named Jim Stevenson. And I got to know him. I knew his son. His son was more my age, and at the time I was in high school. And he had brought a Roland JX8P synthesizer up to the church one day. And the minute I heard that, I was like, whoa, I was 16 years old. I'll never forget it. When I was in school, I was also studying in high school. We had these I took like industrial arts, and I had electronics classes, and I was doing well in electronics, and I was chosen to represent our high school to go to his company, Connect Systems, to design a computer for state competition, and I was the guy that did a lot of the drafting stuff. But anyway, while I was in his company, there was he had invented the Connect Sound Prism synthesizer. And this was before I realized I wasn't even going to synthesizer. I had no clue. And so there was a synthesizer sitting there, and I'd see it, and I didn't pay any mind to it. Other guys would look at it, and they thought it was cool and everything, and didn't pay any mind to it. Well, later on, after when I got older and I started getting into synthesizers myself, and then I moved to Houston, I bought a book by Mark Vail called Vintage Synthesizers, and there's this big article about this synthesizer. I was like, whoa, I've seen that thing. And I was really kicking myself. I was like, man, I should have gone and looked at it, that kind of thing. And then as time progressed, people would talk about this Connect Sound Prism synthesizer. It was one of the first digital synthesizers. It was a pretty amazing beast. And if I can go back in time and tell myself, hey, get over there and play that thing, because someday you're going to wish you did, that kind of thing. So that's the story behind that.
Here we you want to scream? Is it what it seems? Or is it just a dream?
So in the early days of synthesizers in the 60s, I want to use that example, Bob Moog would sell, you'd see Emerson, Lake and Palmer, for example, the band, and they're the guys who had that Lucky Man song. And Keith Emerson would use this big Moog modular. It was you'd see him on stage with this massive box just full of these little modular components, electronic components, and it's like, if you ever seen old pictures of operators talking on phones, the ladies, they'd have their little headsets on and they'd be patching to make a phone call from one end of the country to the other. If you want to call Los Angeles from Houston or whatever. And they patch it, they put you through. Well, same with synthesizers. Modulars, or modular synthesizers, they have these components, and what you do is you have there's patch bays, and you have a cable, and you patch one into the other to route the signal to where you want it to go. And so modular synthesizers in Eurorack, which now is a really popular thing, it's been popular for a while, that are small, because they're small, you don't have to buy this. You can buy the big ones if you want, but you can buy the smaller ones, and you can set up modular rigs, and you can tell the signal path where you want it to go and how you want it to go, and you can buy different modules to pretty much design, almost like designing your own synthesizer. Like, for example, you can buy one module from one company that's going to have their type of engine or whatever, their oscillator or whatever we're going to use, or if you want to go and you want to, let's say you want a popular filter, like for MS-20, Korg MS-20 filter, you can buy that type of filter and you put them there, and by doing that, it gives you your own sound. Where I can't remember how you put it, the other type of hardware synthesizer, which would be like behind me, especially like this Moog right here. These are actual, almost like modular components, but they're already hardwired in the back. So they're pretty much set. You got a Moog synthesizer here with the one company Moog. And to think about synthesizers, a lot of people ask me, why do you use so many different types of synthesizers? Like, I'll use Korg, Yamaha, Roland, many. And the reason is because, to me, it's when I'm writing music, it's like paints or crayons. The more colors I have, the more sound engines I have, the more types of sounds I can get out of that. So with Moog here, when you have these components like this, it's going to be mainly what Moog designed in this. And so each one is like your little modular area, but it's already hardwired in the back, and of course, and you can control and design the sounds with the top panel on these. So that's pretty much the primary difference. And of course, these can also hook up to modular synthesizers. You can run them because of control voltage, or and sometimes they're using MIDI also as well, that kind of stuff.
Oh, yes. So modular synthesizer generally is exactly that in of itself. It's a module. So you'll have a module that is an oscillator. It creates the tone or the sound itself, the sine wave, the square wave, triangle wave, sawtooth, etc. And then as you add modules, you can add things like, of course, you want to add a filter that creates the shape of, or the overall timbre of the sound. And then you can add a module that sequences things and plays pitches, or allows you like input controls like a joystick or a keyboard that lets you control the pitch of the oscillator. And then, of course, various effects. But each one of those in of itself, you have to put them all together in pieces, like puzzle pieces. You have to have an input module possibly, or an output module, because the output voltage of a modular synthesizer isn't something friendly for a standard mixer. And then all in one kind of a box, like a drum machine, a keyboard synthesizer like a DX7, or a Wasp, or anything like that, are self-contained instruments. They have a particular tool set that they have built in, which in some cases is just sound. Sometimes it's sounds and effects. Sometimes it's sequencers. And that's the extent of the all-in-one box, or the self-contained hardware.
So, in the early days of synthesis, synths were built out of discrete parts or modules put in a case, and you could line it up however you want to. The Mini-Moog was the first synthesizer that really changed this paradigm with a fixed architecture and a keyboard, so you couldn't rewire it. It had a standard configuration of the oscillators to the filters to the amplifier. With modular, all that is open, so you can sort of rewire things however you please.
What is it about modular that you prefer over?
It's the flexibility, mainly. You can say you want to stack like 10 oscillators on top of one another. With a normal synthesizer, it's not so immediate to do that. With modular, it's quite trivial. You just need 10 oscillators into a mixer, right? And then you run that to your filter.
Okay, so I'm going to go over a basic analog signal path on an East Coast system. Today I'm going to be using the Erica Sense Black VCO2, the Black Polyvox VCF, VCA wave shaper / ring mod, the fusion modulator as a clock source only, and then their basic envelope for some modulation. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the waveform. I'm going to be using a saw wave, which is a harmonically rich waveform, to demonstrate how filtering works, but the basic saw wave sounds like this. So if I wanted to add some dynamics to that, I could run it through a filter. We're going to be using the Polyvox VCF and the low pass mode in that. And that kind of sounds like this. Okay, so that's just me moving it with my hand. If I want to, I can modulate this with an envelope. If I have a gate source or a trigger source, and that basically allows me to like move this knob back and forth hands free, like so. So you notice every time this lights up, the filtering is going up and down. So that's what an envelope does for you. And that's the very basic gist of what an East Coast system is doing.
A really basic way that I would describe it to a person who doesn't understand analog and digital. And so let's say analog synthesizers were the first ones that come out. And so what they would have is let's use the keyboard type synthesizer where you have, you got your keyboard and you got this top part here. This is an analog synthesizer. When you plug it into a wall, you're getting a current of electricity that comes into there's a motherboard in there, a PC board, however you want to describe it, and it goes into an oscillator. It's pretty much like spinning that electrical current coming in there. And from there, there's wave settings, and they figured out it comes in as a sine wave. And then there's different types of waves. There's sawtooth, triangle, square, that kind of thing. And each type of wave has a different type of sound, has a type of different sound character to it. So when the electric current comes in there, they figured out, okay, we got this thing oscillating in there to keep that in there, and then we can get sound out of that by how we shape that wave. And then from there, we could shape it, the sound of it, with in this type of synthesizer is called a subtractive synthesizer. So we'll be taking elements away from that sound with a filter, and then we have envelope generators. Envelopes for the attack of the sound when you're pressing on a note, the decay and sustain and release of that note that you're pressing at that time, and that's how you design the sound. A basic way I would describe a digital synthesizer is once they found out how to shape the sounds with analog. I'll just go based off of the Yamaha DX7, which was the first commercially, I guess. I don't know if it was the actual first one. I think there were other digital synths, might have been right before that, but it's the main one that came out and it was really popular. What they figured out is they were using microchips were becoming a big thing, and so whether it's frequency modulation, FM, where you have operators and you're stacking these waves or however they're doing it, and they'll use modulators and carriers and all this jargon, technical jargon for that. But more or less, you have microchips on a motherboard, and on those microchips, they found a way to, put the elements to create the sounds, or in some cases, like in romplers, the sounds into those chips. So that way, and they'll even have preset patches, they're called, or sounds that the company made or whoever designed, and they can have everything from pianos, trumpets, horns, that kind of stuff, as well as synthesizer type sounds that you hear more on the analog, where you get the spacey sounds that a lot of us use, that kind of thing.
Digital versus analog. Analog synthesis is using the electronics to create a sound that doesn't involve binary ones and zeros. It's the sound of the circuits themselves that they can generate, the oscillators and the voltage moving through it. In fact, I had a designer from Moog actually was telling me the way he sees it is like little fleas moving through the wires, and it's like a flea circus, and how he moves the fleas through the system. And strange fellow. With digital synthesis, it's a set of algorithms, programs that are designed to generate sounds, but it's emulating sounds or creating an environment that these sounds can work in but there is no everything is on a chip, and it's made up of ones and zeros.
So analog synthesis or electronics take electricity and directly manipulate that electricity with components to produce a result. Digital is a subset of that uses ones and zeros. The key difference here is you have the ability to be very precise with digital, whereas analog, you sort of have to live with the chaos of the system. So you have to work based off of tolerances, right? Things have a plus or minus tolerance. They have a lane they work within. But inside that lane, things can be chaotic and not precise.
I would use it as an analogy. So, I was asked, my mother-in-law asked me at one time, she's like, when she walked into my studio, and she says, why do you have so many keyboards? Why I don't understand why you have so many. A lot of people ask me that, like, why, what is the deal? And initially when I started writing music, I was focused on mainly one company. It was Roland. I was inspired by Duran Duran. They used a lot of Roland. And so I went that route initially. And I really like Roland. But as time moved forward, I started learning by buying other synthesizer brands. And I'm like, wait a minute, these guys have a different type of engine sound altogether. And I realized that, well, by having all these sounds, it goes back to the colors and the crayons and the paints and all that kind of stuff. When you're writing music, it's nice to be able to pull from, if I want this kind of sound, I'm going to go to a Moog, or if I want this, I want to go to Roland. I want to, whatever if I'm writing a song and I got something in my mind, I'm going to go to that route. If that makes any sense. Yeah. Describing the difference between sounds, this is an analogy I would use for that. A lot of times, car enthusiasts or people that own cars, they'll know that if they buy a General Motors car, or they buy a Ford or a Chrysler or whoever, Toyota, whoever it is, it's going to have a different ride to it. You say, let's say you owned, one time I owned a Chevy Blazer. Well, the Chevy Blazer, I bought a Ford Escape. I noticed that there was a different ride. It just had a completely different ride altogether. I think it's the same with synthesizers. They have a different, not a ride, but they have a different flavor or a type of sound. And the companies, what they're really doing good with, what I like, is what we were talking about earlier, is Roland, for example, a lot of times I'll be looking for a certain type of sound, like a Jupiter or Juno sound. I'm able to still get those sounds in a lot of the newer boards. And of course, a lot of people want the newer stuff too, which they'll do. And they'll have that into the new synthesizers, like the JDXI behind me has a little bit of D50 type sounds. It has Jupiter and Juno's type sounds in there. But it also has the other stuff that came out that Roland was doing in their technology at that time to make that one. And it gives it a little bit of different flavor. So I would describe sounds and engines of synthesizers kind of like that, flavors, or maybe like an engine of a vehicle.
The difference in sound generally is the filter. The filter is what creates the timbre of the electronic sound on synthesizers. The filter of a Moog synthesizer is what's referred to as a ladder filter. It has a particular sound. There's the Korg MS-20 infamously is known for its filter, so much so that they actually make just that filter in a pedal, like a guitar pedal box. and it has its own sound. And so, and then there's also Oberheim, who made the SEM filter, which is it's again its own kind of sound to the output of the electronics. So each one of them, it's really based on that. The other thing, of course, that comes into play beyond the filter. Filter is the primary thing mostly, but there is the type of synthesis that changes or that a particular model may have. Like, for instance, again, infamously, the DX7 is known for its FM synthesis. There's also subtractive synthesis. There's also morphing samples of things together, and there's some companies will come up with a name for their type of synthesis, but generally they all produce their own unique sound.
Okay, so like typically the American sound is viewed as more aggressive, hotter, right? Whereas like the Japanese synthesizers tend to sound like tamer, not as like raucous sounding. That's not to say they don't sound good, because they sound amazing, but they sound, I don't know, I'm getting into like poetics here, but they sound like silkier, more polished. When I'm creating an experimental, like let's say a soundscape piece, I tend to, it's kind of a little bit of both, a bit meditative and a bit of musical precision in some ways, or a particular concept that I'm trying to create. So a lot of the machines I tend to use, I try to work with more generative devices where I can, kind of like automatons, I can wind them up, set them a certain way, and then let them go. They're still doing what they're moving in the direction I want them to move in, but they're doing it at their own pace and at their own rate. And so there's a bit of I have some control over it, and I don't have control over a lot of it.
Have you ever felt like that meditative state is that you get into maybe an altered state of consciousness?
Absolutely. I get a little religious here, but I'm a chaos magic practitioner, so the putting myself into what you would call like the void or the chaos kind of state of letting things happen as they happen and not trying to force anything to be a certain way. Let it be. You know, I'm again kind of getting back to the automaton thing. It's a bit chaotic as it moves about, but it's still moving in the direction I want it to move in.
I think I've been doing this a long time, and what really impressed me over the years was if you were to go back in my 20s when I started Vertigo Blue here in Houston, and you said to me, hey, we're going to get a software synthesizer, we're going to use a computer, and someday they're going to be as good as that Juno 106 that you own or the Jupiter 6 I owned. And they said to me, it's going to sound that good. I'd be like, no way. I wouldn't believe it. And I had people say, oh, it's going to be software. I didn't believe it a second of it. Now, as we're in the future now, I'm blown away by the software synths that are coming out, the sound and the way that you can make sounds with those. And they give hardware synthesizers a good run for their money. So as with that known fact, you have companies like Arturia or Cherry Audio making these phenomenal software creations of a lot of the synthesizers or even others. You have this, from the way my perspective is, you have competition because it's like Roland, Korg, Yamaha, or any of those, they're going to be putting out a synth in that engine because they're going to a certain point, they're going to compete because they want to sell that product, which is great for us because it gives us a chance to have all these colors to buy from and different types of, we take advantage of that. It's a great time to be alive because we have all these opportunities for synthesizers. Well, as that goes on, you have these software companies that are just doing these phenomenal jobs on these software synthesizers, known as VST synthesizers or plugins. And it's amazing because we have a choice. We can go on the computer and go that route or go hardware. And I think as long as we have those choices and people are interested, I think we're going to see more competition as time goes along and more development. And as technology gets faster and more powerful, I think we're going to see a lot more powerful stuff coming out in the future. What we can do with sound, from everything from editing to creation, and I think that goes with all technologies of synthesizers and even types of stuff we haven't thought up yet at this point.
The future of synthesizers are that they're way more accessible to the average user or anyone who is wanting to even just dabble with the synthesizer. In fact, there are companies even now making toys that are full synthesizers, but they're designed for children, like 4 and 5 years old. They have MIDI on them. They have, the synthesis properties. There's even a new one that samples, and they look like kids' toys. And so for something that was so unaffordable back in the day, you had to have a rich kid in the band if you were going to have a synthesizer of any scope, that now they're so affordable with the technology is so much more affordable now that even, there's companies even making them for children. With regards to how the future of synthesizers and their effect on the style of music, because a musician who may not have access to such expensive, in the past, being that they were so expensive, access to instruments and sounds that were only available on these devices that were so expensive. Now they're so affordable. The future of music will have musicians experimenting more so with these devices to create more sounds to add to their palette of their song design and creation.
I mean, obviously, LLMs and AI are going to have like a big presence going forward. I sort of like am stuck in the past as far as that goes. I don't even own a computer anymore or use a computer really. So like people like me might get left behind. But these like new models are going to be able to come up with like things that you can't even like imagine right now, right? Just an entirely new way of doing things.
No, I think just the opposite. I think they'll become more important because, acoustic instruments or guitars or brass, and I think those all have an important place in music as well. We know that, and pianos even, whatever. But as we have the technology and the ability to do all the things we can do with synthesizers or electronic equipment even, or gear that comes out, it's just so vast. And I think it'd be walking backwards if we didn't keep on moving forward, if that makes any sense.
With everything, it's cyclical, so I would say they would be very relevant because as tastes evolve and the ear of the beholder evolves to listen to things that are more what would be considered too avant-garde or unlistenable in the past, electronic devices to create music with have gone through so many cyclical changes where back in the day when analog synthesizers were that's how you created electronic music, and then digital came along in the 80s, the end of the 70s into the 80s, and people were literally putting these old, what they considered junk keyboards and drum machines on the side of the road, like sitting on the curb ready for trash pickup, because the new digital whiz-bang thing came out. And now that that's cycled to where people want the analog stuff, they want the old gear, they want those sounds, and it's again going through that cycle again where now there's hybrids that have both the analog and the digital all in one. So it will keep evolving.
Both, right? People still use old instruments. That doesn't change their status as like an icon or a relic. So I think modern synths, analog, digital, etc., non-computer synths have their place. People still enjoy them. People still like using them just like they like using a guitar or a drum set. Definitely they have like a certain sound to them that we've like become familiar with and enjoy. So I really don't think they're going anywhere.
I think we found a planet.
It goes back to sound. When I hear Pittsburgh Modular, for example, I really like the sound. I had the opportunity to attend NAMM, the NAMM convention in Anaheim, California, a few times. And when I was there, I'd see some of these small companies, and I'd look at their synthesizers. And sound, it comes back to sound. It really comes down to it, the type of sound they offer. Of course, there's features that they'll put, or they'll have new ideas, and which many are great. There's a company, I don't know how to say their name. It's UDO. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. And they're more of a newer company, and I've really seen them develop, and they're really coming a long ways. I think they're something to watch. I think over a period of time, I think we're going to see them as a really major player, if not already. I think they're, and same with Pittsburgh Modular and some of these other guys. And I've met some of these guys that are making these things, and it's just amazing. In this type of, not only the components that are making are modulars, whether it's a modular synthesizer, whatever type of instrument they're making, it really comes back to sound. So if they can capture a type of sound or a signature, it's kind of like an artist, a music artist. If you have your own sound and your own signature to your sound, if you're a songwriter or a composer, I think you're going to give yourself a pretty good advantage over someone that wants to emulate some other band that's already been out there and we've already heard.
Definitely, I generally tend to be, as of late, more interested in the pop-up little company that's building something in their garage that's unique to everything else. The major companies generally tend to kind of stick to the they kind of like to stick to the collective, this is what works. How many can we sell? We're moving product. The major companies, Roland, Yamaha, even Behringer with all their clones, they see what sells hot, they copy it, put it out there. Roland tends to make particular devices that will work for a lot of people across a large genre of styles and things. The boutique companies are the ones really pushing the boundaries, where they have bizarre sequencers or bizarre sound approaches, bizarre use of the thing, and tend to have, for me, more of a creative outlet to make my creations with.
So the thing about major manufacturers is they have to appeal to a certain market. So they're really never going to break free of particular formulas that have been market tested and work. I.e., East Coast mini Moog style synthesis, right? You have oscillators going into filters, going into amplifiers, maybe some effects, but that's always going to be how major synths are, right? That's what people are looking for. The thing about small manufacturers is that they can sidestep all that and do something completely experimental and out of left field, which there's a lot. There's a lot to explore that people haven't really got into yet, because it might not sell, right? Or it might not sell as well as like something that's not a private company could produce in scale like that.
For me, with Vertigo Blue, how I've always done it, for the most part, I always write the music first. And with synthesizer, well, I've used synthesizers. It's my main instrument. I don't play guitar, and I use synthesizers and I use hardware samplers. I have old Emax samplers. I got two of them. I have an Emax 1 and Emax 2. Emax 1 has analog filters on it, Emax 2 doesn't. But they have their own sound. And so when I'm working on music, I'll usually have an idea in my head. I've even had to dream of songs. I have to get up at 4 in the morning and finish the song. But I'll have this idea in my head, and I'll say, okay, well, usually by knowing the type of idea in my head, it knows what kind of sound I'm looking for. So I'm going to go to the synthesizer first. That's going to make that sound that I'm hearing the most. And I go to that one, and I build up the song. And to get the story of the song, like for example, my song Area 51 or Loch Ness, I'll listen to the song afterwards, and I'll listen to it over and over, the instrumental version, of course, because there's no lyrics yet. And I'll think, what does that emulate, or not emulate, what does that sound like to me? Like Area 51 example, it sounded like an air raid sirens. And that song, actually, how I come up with that, there was the band The Fix in the 80s. They had a song called Red Skies, and Red Skies at Night, and it had that, almost to me was like an airy sound, where airy and alarming sound. And same with Area 51, what I thought about it. And so I was like, what would cause that? And so I was thinking, boy, if we ever had aliens from outer space land on Earth, there would be some alarming thing there. And then we had the 1947 Roswell incident that Coast to Coast AM radio would talk about all the time. I listened to that when I was on my job. And so I was like, you know what, that'd be pretty interesting. So that's how I came up with the idea for Area 51, and that's how I do it most songs. Loch Ness, there's a sound I use. It was from a buddy of mine, Spike. I think you're going to talk to him pretty soon. And he had let me borrow his Kurzweil K2000, and it was this sound that has this knocking sound, and it reminded me of a boat sinking. What would cause a boat to sink? And I like scary things, so I'm like, well, if I was in the water with that beast and I locked eyes onto that thing, we'd have a problem, and here a boat sank, and that's how I come up with this song, Loch Ness, that kind of thing.
my preferred method is to, I usually go into my library of devices of all different machines and things that have a particular sound, a particular voice, maybe even a particular tool set that I'll start with. And then from there, I'll start adding a different synth in or a drum machine in. If I want a pulse or a beat to it, I might want a kick drum, but I want a specific kick drum from like a 909 or an 808 or something, that I want that analog kick moving through the device. But then I'll say I'm working with a buchla, that erratic kind of voice of its sound, but it's a particular sound set that I'll kind of start with that voice and then start bringing other voices into the chorus.
I tend to prefer a lot like long form performances using raw synthesis versus like sampling or being ultra refined, I guess. I sort of like the punk rock approach of just like sequencers, synthesizers, and just like working a sequencer instead of like recording, take multiple takes, etc. That's not me.
No, it's that's 100% impossible. I always had this saying: too many synths and not enough time. But what's nice about software, I've wanted to own so many vintage classic synthesizers, but now software synthesizers out, I own many of those. And so if I don't have it in hardware, I have it in software. It's pretty much how it works.
It's never possible to have too many synths. Full stop.
I don't think so. If you look at, have you seen Trent Reznor's collection? It's huge. I mean, it's literally like a museum of synthesizers. It's obviously going to be a personal decision. But for me, no, not really. I guess to an extent, but not really.